Like many of you, I was checking out the PlayStation State of Play and came out of it a bit less excited than I thought I would be. Similar to many game presentations, there was a mix of games I had zero interest in, some I'm curious about, and others I'm definitely going to be playing. They capped off the show with what seems to be the first 20 minutes of God of War Lofty gameplay, which is mad awesome. Yet, I can't help but feel kind of disappointed by how familiar the gameplay looked. It's definitely different, but very similar. Ultimately, that's on me for hoping for something a bit more new, but it's also a good reminder of how perception shapes reality. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know I love a good sequel, even if it's similar to what's come before. But all these thoughts have given me some illumination on why do video games review the way they do. I try not to get sucked into the cesspool of negativity surrounding XYZ title of the week, but sometimes you can't help but step in it. Mixtape in particular brought up an interesting conversation around its review scores, specifically IGN giving it a 10. I got a chance to play through the game and personally really enjoyed it, but I was surprised on how well it did review. In isolation, it felt like a solid 8 to me, and while its current Metacritic has been brought down quite a bit, there was a point in time where it was in the low 90s, which is surprisingly high. Mixtape is very light on interactivity, which I think is perfectly fine. One of the beauties of video games is how much they can vary in their approaches to player experience and interactivity, and so if it's not for you, it's not for you. But it is a good example of the disconnect between players and reviewers. IGN often finds themselves at the center of these discussions and controversies. There's an undeniable inconsistency to the scores they give out, which for many players is maddening due to their status within the industry. Why is this? I've seen some accusations of them and other reviewers not being above an extra payday, if you know what I mean. But I haven't seen any credible evidence to support this claim, so I think this is pretty easily dismissed. There's definitely some truth to there being extra pressure to possibly losing early access to games if there's a negative review with a specific publisher, but this doesn't really affect individual reviewers at IGN as much, with them being more insulated compared to smaller content creators. Another claim I've seen in the abyss is that reviewers suck at games. I'm not trying to run cover here for IGN, but this is just logically a bad take. Most people in games media do not get paid especially well, and while, like in any industry, I'm sure there's some individuals who don't want to be there, it's the most logical to believe that most reviewers at least somewhat enjoy playing video games in order to have put themselves in a position where they play a lot of video games. Between liking games and having to play video games for hours a day for work, it'd be hard to argue anything besides the fact that game reviewers are on average going to be better at video games than most consumer players. Now with that said, of course, you may have specialist players who only play a specific game or genre of games, which undeniably may make them better than the vast majority of reviewers for a specific game, but as a whole, your typical reviewer is just not going to suck at video games. Instead of any of those things mentioned, the simplest answer is that IGN has random people reviewing random games with individual yet random opinions. This is no clearer than with a game like Marvel Spider-Man 2. Player opinions seem to be quite mixed on if the story and gameplay may or may not improve over the original, with IGN in particular giving it an 8, as in great. IGN previously gave Spider-Man 1 an 8.7 and the remastered version a 9, so logically you can conclude that Spider-Man 2 was great, but not as good as the first. But when you listen to the reviewer assigned to Spider-Man 2, he states that he thought it was probably the best of the three. Regardless if you agree with those specific scores or not, how can you have Spider-Man 1 at an 8.7 and a 9, and then give 2 an 8 when you specifically state on how 2 is probably better? Well, that's because the games were reviewed by two totally different people with different opinions. I don't believe reviewers at IGN should be required to score sequels based on the score of the original in mind, but their structure inherently invites all sorts of inconsistencies and dramas. They present their scores and opinions of holding so much value and authority on behalf of the industry, but then complain when people take them too seriously when there's clear inconsistencies. IGN wants the reviews to hold value, but doesn't want to be held to a higher standard than just some random guy who makes videos about games. If they really valued the impact of their voice within the industry, they could have multiple reviewers assigned to a title to avoid nearly as many outliers. This wouldn't satisfy everyone, since at the end of the day we're still talking about opinions, but having the average of several reviewers of varying backgrounds would lead to much more consistency. I don't pretend to know the financials of IGN, and so I don't know if this would be viable, but their current approach is fairly unserious and so should be treated as such. But again, this isn't the case when their scores have the largest impact on Metacritic and public opinion. In a perfect world, the reviews should hold about as much value as mine, just some random guy with an opinion that you may or may not agree with. And this is part of why I put more stock in individual creators' reviews, because I have somewhat of more of an idea of what that person's taste is in relation to my own. My personal taste in games are quite a bit different to someone like a Mr. Matty Plays, but I can get a better gauge of whether or not I may or may not like that particular game listening to him and learning over time where we overlap and differ. Or beyond a single person, the Kinda Funny crew does a pretty good job of putting together a varied panel of opinions that feel more balanced yet still personal. Greg Miller, for example, will explain to you why he likes Starfield instead of framing his singular opinion as a consolidated representation of an entire company. So random people reviewing random games will lead to inconsistent scores. But even with individual creators, there's still one more big disconnect I often see with players compared to the rest of the industry, and that's novelty. We all love games that push the medium forward, but to what degree do we punish a refined experience for being familiar versus rewarding a messy attempt for being novel? Take SkillUp. I find him to have an extremely deep and thoughtful dissection of games, while also a bit jealous of his ability to articulate himself as eloquently and concise as he does. But at times I've found some of his reviews to feel strangely unbalanced, at least for the standard I've set for him based on his previous work. His thoughts on Ghost of Yotei seem perplexingly negative for such an overall quality package. Overall, his review of Yotei ended up on the more negative side of things, but then he had fairly positive feelings towards Mixtape, praising its ability to capture the memory of youth at an interesting inflection point in most people's lives. His opinions on Forza Horizon 6 actually seemed to be fairly in line with my own, with much of the same praises and complaints, yet I found myself feeling more positive overall about my experience than he seemed to. It goes without saying, opinions differ, and that's great. But I bring up these individual reviews to illustrate how Ralph values novelty a lot more than I and many other players do. Yotei is a familiar sequel to a game that already had a very familiar formula. I'd argue it does it better than most of the games of that style, but it is undeniably familiar, as is Forza Horizon 6. Mixtape might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it is fairly unique with little to compare it to. Ralph is not alone in valuing novelty as much as he does. I feel like I play a lot of games, but in reality, my end of the year list pales in comparison to someone like SkillUp and many other reviewers, including IGN. Playing so many games compared to the average player, it almost becomes inevitable for full-time reviewers to become somewhat desensitized to familiar quality over the taste of some new flavor never experienced before. I, to a lesser degree, can relate to this feeling where, as I mentioned earlier, God of War Laufey just doesn't have me as excited to play as I feel like I normally would be, likely due to that 5-year gap since the last game for what seems to be a very familiar feeling title. Now fast forward to the release, and I wouldn't be surprised if it ended up as my game of the year, but I think this is a lot of why there can often be a disconnect between players and reviewers. A site like IGN wants the clicks and traffics of a review, but isn't too interested in consistency, while individual reviewers play so many games, the excitement of something that feels new is valued above all. At the end of the day, I think it's best to take all reviews with a grain of salt, since it's just a person's feelings, and the goal may be to take a slightly bigger grain of salt from those you trust. Before you go, make sure you leave a comment about a game you loved that wasn't seen so positively by reviewers, or inversely as well if you want to do that. As always, I appreciate you for watching, and until next time, see ya.